Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today I'm going to bring you folks along as we do a garden tour while it's 115 degrees. Let's take a look. Well, many parts of the United States are sweltering right now. And usually when we do our videos, we like to do it in the morning when everything's at its peak and it's nice and pleasant outside. I thought I'd do something a little bit different today with it being the last day of June. Right now it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it is hot. So I think the temperature is right at 100. The feels like is at 116 right now. I just wanted everyone to see what the garden looks like whenever it's this hot outside. So we'll start here in the old garden. Let's take a look. The old garden does relatively well here in the heat of the summer because it's shaded from those big old oak trees right there. About 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, those guys kick in and it prevents a large part of the hottest part of the day from beating our plants down a little bit. So let's just start over here and we'll work our way around. This is the Vegeta raised beds. Here on the front of it, we have Roma tomatoes. And let's see here, we do have several that have already set back there. Hopefully you can see them. And then, you know, of course, these are the pimento peppers and they're coming along nicely. You can see they're starting to set their fruit as well. And then, of course, our jalapenos. Now these are the regular jalapenos. These are not the mild jalapenos. We'll look at those when we get to the pallet garden, but just down the row here, you can see the flowers are doing really well. We have a lot of pollinators that come through here. Also our basil, we have to come out routinely and pick the buds off of it this time of year. You can see these guys. You just pull these off and your basil plant will continue on. If you let these bad boys go to seed though, it'll start dying back and you'll lose a lot of your leaves. But we eat so much basil, we try to keep these going all the way through the fall if we can. And then look at our cherry tomatoes, how tall they're getting. We're really enjoying this trellis idea. We'll see, hopefully it puts off a lot of fruit as well, but our cherry tomatoes are set. They're starting to swell in size. These are the yellow pear and then yellow pear. And I believe those are the sweet millions. And those, I believe, are the dancing with Smurfs. You know, when you tie them up close like that, they kind of intermingle, so it's hard to tell till the color starts coming in. This is just fantastic. If we step back just a minute and look at these zinnias and the marigolds, they are definitely doing their job. We have found a few pests here and there in our tomatoes, but nothing like what it was last year at this point. Nothing really exciting in here, unless you're a big okra fan like we are. It's no secret Leslie's pickles are fantastic. They are only matched by her pickled okra. So the okra's doing well, it's coming along. It will grow exponentially over the next couple of weeks. It really loves the heat. We had mentioned this before. We tried to put down here, when the chickens came through and wiped everything out, we had tried to grow some of our lettuce in here. Yesterday, the last little bit of the lettuce died off whenever the temperatures yesterday got to about 118, and lettuce is not a fan of heat like that. But these green beans, they are doing really well. We're hoping that we can start picking green beans from this bed and the carrot bed that we did just for our canning purposes. We're hoping in a couple weeks they'll get there, but last time you folks saw these, they were little bitty and they have come a long way since then. So you can see the grass we put in, it's doing relatively well. I do want to point out real fast while we're down here, I am watering all of our gardens and pollinators every other day. Our goal is to get them 4 inches of water every week when the temperatures are exceeding 100 degrees. So essentially I try to get out here every other day and give them an inch and a quarter of water in each one of our beds. Now these cucumbers, you can tell they're a little bit droopy. They're doing pretty good, you know, it's not, but as we move our way down here, you can see the shade is starting to get them, which is going to really help out these slicing cucumbers. You see how these leaves get kind of wilty. I try not to touch the plants too much during this. They're way more fragile when they lose that turgor pressure at this time of the day than they are, you know, first thing in the morning or once the sun gets off of them for a few hours. They'll perk back up, and if you need to come out and do some trimming, that's the time to do it. So we looked at these last time we did our garden tour, but look at the size of this, the fronds on this deal. They are really fragrant. Before we actually stepped into the top garden, I wanted to sort of step back a little bit here and get a view of these pollinators and how well they're doing. Even in this heat, they are thriving. It seems that a lot of the blooms are actually getting bigger if you look at the size of some of these. And our pollinators are loving it. We're not having to hand pollinate a lot of our squash because of the amount of pollinators around. All right, let's step inside here and take a look. So as you can see, these beans are doing really well. They're coming along nicely in size. I wanted to show, this is one of the reasons I wanted to show it. Look how the leaves get kind of curled up and such. That's just to prevent losing moisture from the plants. They'll kind of curl up a little bit, and the leaves will it'll prevent the sun from hitting them as direct. They'll save them some water, but as soon as the sun goes down, these things will perk right back up. The marigolds were a good idea to leave in here. I kind of like the way they look, you know, especially whenever these green beans start to get a little bit bigger. Let's look at this real fast. This has happened a few times. You see this green bean plant right there? In these excessive temperatures, some plants just cannot take it. So this guy right here, if he's not up, which I doubt he will be, what I'll do is I'll just pull this plant out and put a new bean in the hole and water them in real good. You can do that right up until the beans make the canopy to where the sun doesn't hit the bottom so the seeds can't germinate. But take a look at this. This is one of our success stories. This was just a volunteer tomato. We have no idea where it came from. It just started coming up, so we let it go, and then we tied it up to the fence and put a stake in. But it's not a cherry tomato like the other one, so my guess is that this is one of the Arkansas Travelers, but I have no idea. Until it starts coloring up, I won't know much about it till then, but we'll see. All right, now over here, this squash plant has been getting beat up a lot, predominantly from the wind. It cracked at the bottom. We showed that in our last video, but it's still moving along. You can tell the new leaves that are coming in are starting to green up pretty good, so maybe it'll be able to survive a little bit. Down here, we put these in at the end when we lost some of our other vegetables, but these are just some extra pimento peppers we had along the way. They seem to be doing really well. As the heat goes on, they are starting to grow really well. When the wind took out the kale here in the middle, these two kale plants that made it, they have just dominated. I guess just having that extra room. And then our cayenne peppers, you can see we're starting to get just a few. We'll start taking these bad boys off and using them whenever we pickle our banana peppers, and we'll get over to look at the banana peppers in a minute. We only have 2 zucchinis left, and this is one of them. But you can see this bad boy is doing good. We tied him up, and it seems to be avoiding a lot of the pest pressure, but we get a nice sized zucchini every couple days, which is fantastic for Leslie and I. And then next to them, our bell peppers have really taken off. Even the one here underneath the zucchini plant has done relatively well. So, but you can see the peppers have started to set. Some relatively decent sized ones in there as well. So we're hoping it's going to be a good year for peppers. Peppers love the heat anyway. So then as we finish off this row here, these cherry tomatoes are just killing it right now. And we have actually started eating cherry tomatoes already. This is what I was talking about. You see those right there? We'll just pick that bad boy off down here. And good to go. Let's step back here and I'll show you There we go. Look at that. Those orange tomatoes are absolutely delicious. We have had a few of them. We like to let them get really colored on the vine. They seem to be sweeter that way. But so far, most of the things are doing okay in the heat. We did lose our corn. We put that in the last video as well. So we planted this okra bed about 2 weeks after the other one. We keep it nice and damp in here just to make sure it doesn't dry out, to give the okra a chance to come up. Once it starts sprouting, okra is not going to have an issue with the heat. And then these guys are fantastic. They're some of our favorites. Ooh, there's one right there. Call them ground cherries because you wait for them to fall and you can pick them up. Put that in my pocket and eat it here in just a minute. This really is one of our favorite new additions. We had never grown these until last year. We grew them last year, loved them, and they'll be a permanent part of our garden from now on. Look at this. You can see the leaves, the older leaves on these squash plants. They get beat up a lot. I don't remove them as much as I do whenever the weather is a little nicer, because I just want as much shade as possible on the inside of the plants. But you can see they are incredibly prolific. I do not go through and pollinate like I do in the late spring as much as I do now, just because there are so many pollinators from those flowers down there on the bottom that in the mornings and in the evenings these squash plants are just covered in bees and other pollinators, and so we haven't really seen a decline in the number of squash we're getting. So we just kind of let nature do its thing, right? And then these are the banana peppers, and you can see they're, you know, of course they get beat down, but if we look in here you can see how many banana peppers. We have already put up a jar of pickled banana peppers and we've been able to eat them pretty routinely. So as the summer goes along, these guys will get more and more peppers on them. You can see if we get in here, let's see, they have blooms on them, and believe it or not, the blooms on the peppers, they'll still set during this heat, whereas a lot of the other vegetables will have a difficult time setting when it's so hot. Look at that guy. Yeah. As we move on to the pallet garden, if we take a step back, you can see the progress that the watermelons, and these are the winter squashes, the butternuts, and then back over there are the cantaloupe. I try not to walk in there too much because I don't want to disturb the vines that are here on the ground, but there are a lot of melons in that bed. The cantaloupe have just started setting because they were a little late coming in. But if we look in here, it won't be long now and we'll be picking these butternut squash. There's probably about a dozen or so. And in my experience with butternut squash, the way it works is we'll get this first round, we'll get a dozen or so. When we pick those off, they'll be reset on the plant. They'll start putting off a lot more female flowers, and then we'll have a whole nother round. Last year, or I'm sorry, the year before, when we grew these in the pallet garden, I think total we ended up getting almost 40 butternut squash throughout the course of a year. I just want to point out the white on there, that's the DE. We had a lot of squash bugs in this for whatever reason. Butternut squash is just a magnet for those things. So we put the DE on it and we spray it, and you know, it's inevitable it's going to be a fight for the rest of the year. But as long as I get my butternut squash, I'll be happy. So I had mentioned these are the mild jalapenos, the ones in the old garden, pardon. Those are the ones that are going to be hot. These here should have just a very, very small trace of heat. There's not a lot of peppers on these guys compared to something like the banana peppers, but you know, these up here in the front, they have quite a few peppers that are setting on them. If they're anything like last year, we're gonna have plenty of peppers. They start picking up in July and August, and it's looking right now that the heat's gonna be here to stay. So now let's go to our Roma tomatoes. These guys are a bit out of control. I've trimmed up the bottom down here. You can see because of the proximity to the butternut squash, I didn't want to take a risk of any of the squash bugs getting in here. So I just went ahead and proactively covered the ground with the DE. We haven't had any issues so far. But if we look in here, there are Roma tomatoes all over the place. And they're still setting on the tops. So we've made sure that we keep the fertilizing regimen going. It looks like it's going to be a good year for us for tomatoes again, and I don't want to deplete the soil and have to deal with blossom end rot towards the end of the year. Let's see if we can't get a little, there we go. There's another side. As you can see, just every one of these plants is loaded with tomatoes, so we're incredibly excited. We feel really fortunate. And then of course, one of our favorites, the Beefmasters. We can get in here and you can see these are a little bit more difficult because they grow in the little clefts here, but there are some mammoth green tomatoes in here. In fact, I had to pull 2 of our tomatoes out of here because it was splitting. They were growing together between the branches and they were splitting my tomato plants. I mean, I guess there's worse problems to have, but you can see the size of those guys in there. You can tell they're also still setting their fruits, and these plants have kind of outgrown my system that I had to hold them up. So I've got some large 8-foot stakes I'm going to put in between each one, and then I'll just use them to sort of tie up these tomatoes as they get bigger. Look at that. Wow. Well, I hope you folks enjoyed seeing the garden when it's at its worst, as the man says. As you can see, it's about time for me to go inside and grab some air conditioning. It is hot out here right now. As always, I appreciate you all hanging out with me. Till next time, I hope you all take care of yourselves. Peace.